So hello and welcome, Microbehunter here, and in this video I would like to give all those people who want to buy a microscope, especially for children, but who have no previous experience with microscopes, I'd like to give you some help here, and I'd like to give you some basic information on what to look out for when you go shopping for microscopes for children. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. I'm Oliver. I've been teaching biology in schools for, well, the past 23 years now, as of the making of this video. I am by training originally a microbiologist, but then later on switched over to education. I've been doing this now for quite a few years. And for this reason, microscopes are, of course, a central part of our curriculum. And I also teach the use of microscopes in my biology lessons. But very frequently I do get questions, emails, sometimes personal requests from parents who want to buy a microscope for their son or daughter, usually as a present, Christmas, birthday, and they ask me for advice. And I've also received quite a few emails of people who want to buy microscopes for children, and they basically have very little background information about this. And this is the reason why I decided, well, I'm going to make a video to give you the basic information. Now, this video might be a little bit longer than one might expect. The reason is because I would like to gather all of the information that's relevant into one video. But if you want to jump to a specific chapter or topic, then please do go down into the description because I may added sub-chapters so that you're able to click directly on the timestamp, and then you can jump ahead and just listen to that, what's relevant for you. Some additional information about myself. I've been making now YouTube videos related to microscopy for a few years now. I do have a website as well. You're just watching to one of several of my microscopy YouTube channels. So if you're interested in observing a little bit nature and getting to know some of the techniques that one can use to put specimens under the microscope, then I would like to invite you over also to my other channel where I publish regular videos about microscopy as well. I would also like to invite you over to visit my Amazon affiliate shop where I have collected several microscopy related products which you might be interested in, and by buying over the Amazon affiliate shop, you're of course also supporting the channel here. So why would someone be interested in actually introducing children to microscopy? Well, there can be a variety of different reasons. In most cases, I assume that the parents, grandparents would like to get their grandchildren interested in the natural sciences, into observing nature. And of course, I think microscopes are quite an ideal way to do that. And the costs are also not so high. There can be also reasons like I'm a father of two boys myself. Maybe you want to get your children away a little bit from the video games. This is not always easy because video games are highly interactive and very fast paced. And of course, you would like to open doors to other aspects of our environment as well. And microscopes, when we observe nature, of course, allows us to do that. And so we get to get the kids a little bit away into other activities. Well, and then of course, it might be that some parents need microscopes for homeschooling for whatever reason. Their own school might not be able to provide devices like microscopes, or there is no school available, and therefore the parents want to take a little bit more initiative. Well, there can be a variety of different reasons, but in many cases there is one fundamental problem, and that problem is that the people who are now in charge of obtaining a microscope maybe don't know a lot about microscopy. And for this reason, I would like to start off with the very first question, and that question is what is the age of the child? Because this is, I think, a very fundamental question, because the age of the child determines to a significant part the type of microscope that you would like to buy. So, first of all, I think, that is my personal opinion, people might disagree, I think that it might not make a lot of sense to buy microscopes to children that are significantly younger than, let's say, 6 or 7 years. So usually around the time when children start to read. And I think it might not make a lot of sense because at that time the children still have to learn the hand-eye coordination. And when you want to operate a microscope like this, there are simply too many things to turn. There's the focus, two focus knobs, the coarse and fine focus, different different magnification, there's switches, there's the power intensity, and then you have to look through the microscope with one eye. And for many children, this can be a little bit overwhelming. And I think, therefore, if you decide to buy a microscope to a young child, then I think this can only be done meaningfully if there is a lot of parental support as well. I think it's not going to work if you just simply buy a nice device and then simply leave the child alone with a microscope, because they might look at a few things, usually the prepared slides that come with the microscope. But I think boredom might set in quite quickly because they've seen everything that there is to see. That's what they think, because they don't know yet how to prepare specimens and so on. So as a general rule, the type of microscope that you buy and the parental support that you're willing to give are, I think, quite connected. Okay, but let's start at a very young age. Which type of microscope is more suitable now for young children? So for young children, I highly recommend so-called stereo microscopes. And I've got a model here. Now, this is a slightly older model, but it doesn't really matter because they all look quite similar. And stereo microscopes here, are quite solidly made and quite bulky sometimes. This is necessary because, of course, like with most microscopes, you need a lot of stability. But one of the advantages of stereo microscopes for young children is that there are actually several advantages. First of all, that you get an upright image. You know, the so-called compound microscopes like I have over here, they will give an inverted image. This doesn't really matter that it's inverted because the object that you look at on the microscope slide is too small anyway to be seen, so you don't know that it's inverted. But over here with those stereo microscopes, what you can do is you can, whatever you want to look at, you just directly put here on the stage and you get an upright image. So those stereo microscopes work like very strong magnifying glasses. So there is sometimes light coming from the bottom. There's also light coming from the top. Yeah, you see here, this is the lamp from the top. There's some switches here. And you basically focus by raising and lowering the whole head here usually by turning a knob. And you can change the magnification by changing the objective. I have to put it down here. There's a possibility to rotate this top part, and now it says 4. So 4 times 10, the eyepiece is magnified 10 times, gives a total magnification of 40 times. When you change it over to 2 times 10 is of course 20 times magnification. So upright image is a very important characteristic with those stereo microscopes. So children have a much easier time to actually also manipulate the specimen. So when they put something in from the left side, then you're actually going to see it also through the eyepieces coming in from the left side because it's not upside down. And so there's an easier way to actually orient yourself with the things that you actually see. So it's a more natural extension of your senses. And I think kids are going to have a much easier time this way. And the stereo microscopes are called stereo microscopes because you get a stereoscopic image. This means that the left and the right eye receive slightly different pictures, and then you actually really do get a sense of depth. Yeah, so if you, for example, put an insect under the microscope, then the insect actually seems to jump out directly into your face a little bit because you subjectively perceive it as being stereoscopic, three-dimensional. Now, compound microscopes like I have over here, they also have 2 eyepieces, but because there's only one objective down here, both the left and the right eye receive the same picture. So you receive a flat image. And also the specimens that you can look at with those, they have to be significantly smaller, and there is not so much, they have to be completely flat as well. So there is not so much sense of depth anyway. So you see the different types of microscopes, they actually are designed to look at different specimens. But stereo microscopes, all you do is you take whatever specimen you find, an insect, a leaf, I don't know, your fingers, you put it directly under the microscope here, and you can start to observe it directly without the need of any specimen preparation. So in other words, stereo microscopes allow for a much quicker and less complicated observation of the environment. There is no specimen preparation necessary. if you want to put a fly or an insect under a compound microscope like over here, you have to dissect it first and take it apart first to actually put it on the microscope slide, and then you're able to put it on the stage here, and then you're able to see it. Not necessary with the stereo microscopes. You just put it down here and you're able to go. So this is basically my fundamental recommendation. Young children, stereo microscopes, and basically because it's, I would say, a more natural extension of one's vision, and also because the images do look more spectacular. I have to tell you that, because the images are less abstract. Yeah. Adults who might be interested a little bit also benefit from those microscopes. So, for example, if you're maybe not a very common hobby these days anymore, but if you're collecting stamps, you can observe stamps here. Minerals can be observed. Yeah? Things that cannot be observed very well with, or not at all with stereo microscopes, are objects that are too small. So many people want to see bacteria because, yeah, in the media and out there, the word bacteria is quite well known, and they cannot be seen because they're way too small. Yeah, and I think bacteria are not very interesting anyway. But one simply has to know what to expect and what one can see with those microscopes here. So this is recommendation number one. Young children, definitely stereo microscopes. So what happens if the child is already a little bit older, maybe already has a little bit of experience using microscopes from school, and would like to also now have one at home? Well, this is where things start to become a little bit more interesting. Age also plays a role still, but and of course money. So what I have here is the following. I just want to show you. This is a typical so-called introductory microscope, and these microscopes are relatively low cost. They cost around 100 euros, $100 US dollars, and they are already I would say a pretty decent start into microscopy. There are certain things that those microscopes cannot do, and I'm going to also explain this. But yeah, considering from what was available, I don't know, only 10 years ago or 15, 20 years ago, these devices are really remarkable, honestly, because they're quite, generally they have a surprisingly good price-performance ratio. It's important to say that these are not toy microscopes here. This is already I would say, a decent introductory microscope. The parts are all made of metal. All the key parts are made of metal. Over here, of course, the focus knobs are plastic. That's fine. Even in this model, the stage is made of aluminum. There is a battery compartment down here because it's an LED, so you're not dependent on a power supply. But of course, there is here in the back also the possibility to connect an adapter, and here that's the switch. Here it is. Okay. So this is basically a microscope that I would generally recommend as a beginner's microscope, but yeah, it does have a few disadvantages. Yeah, because simply it's significantly cheaper, so it cannot have all of the features. One of the disadvantages is that the optical quality or the image quality is not quite as sharp as you get from one of the better microscopes. However, it's still pretty good. So that's not to say that they're bad. They're not. Okay. However, there are different introductory microscopes which all look pretty much the same or very similar, that still have a couple of significant differences, and the biggest difference is the type of objectives that they have. The objectives that this particular model has are quite large. Okay, they're pretty decent sized objectives made of metal on the outside, and they have already a pretty good image quality. However, there are other introductory microscope models which are even a little bit cheaper, that have significantly smaller objectives, and especially at the higher magnifications, that you do see a notable deterioration in image quality. So you might not know that if you cannot compare it, but I know that this is very low in contrast and a little bit fuzzy. Okay, and so I was actually quite happy that this particular model here had for the price, you always have to relate it to the price, pretty decent optics. However, you might not be able to see the size difference on the different microscope models, but generally you do get what you pay for. Okay, so generally the more expensive the microscope is, the better quality it is. Now, those introductory microscopes are lacking an important part, and that is the so-called the condenser. I need to show this to you over here on this microscope. You cannot see it because the stage covers it, but there is an optical system beneath the stage with a lever that you can move back and forth. That's the condenser diaphragm, and the condenser is really important actually for bundling the light. And this allows you to control the depth of field and contrast. And this one has one. This one has a condenser. Pretty much all microscopes have one, except those introductory microscopes. Yeah? That's a cost savings aspect. Some people say it can be an advantage that they don't have a condenser because it simplifies the things for the children a little bit. But what they do have is a wheel that can be turned, and sometimes there are color filters in there, or holes of a different size. And I have to tell you one thing. I don't know, I've already tested several of these introductory microscopes. This filter wheel is pretty pointless. Okay, there is almost no difference, or there is no difference, and I don't know why they still keep on including those. The holes that the apertures that you see are way too large. And if you make them smaller, then there is too little light going through. So this is actually a feature, which is actually, I think, not really a feature. And I have to tell you, it's in most cases, or in pretty much all cases, I was not able to see a difference. Yeah. So that is an important, but who cares? We just ignore it, and we're able to do microscopy nevertheless. And over here, these are the stage clips, which allow you to hold the slide that you would like to look at. The slightly better microscopes, of course, have a so-called a mechanical stage, where you have over here on the side up. Let me show you here. There are two knobs that you can turn, and this way you're able to precisely and accurately position the slide. So it makes actually manipulation of the slide significantly easier, and that's also, of course, a cost savings aspect that you have here. Otherwise, another important difference is that this is a so-called a monocular tube, so that there's one eyepiece. I did not put in the eyepiece. Now I have to do that. You know what? Just to show you, the eyepieces are standardized. So I can simply take out one from over here and put it in here. Okay, so the eyepieces are standardized, and those microscopes generally come with two eyepieces, a 10 times magnifying eyepiece and a 25 times magnifying eyepiece. I always recommend just use the 10 times magnifying eyepiece. It'll be just fine. Okay, so those microscopes I'm hiding myself here. Those microscopes can be obtained for, I think I already said that, around 100 euros or dollars. And I think if there's anyone who would like to start microscopy without spending too much money at the beginning, and because maybe you're not certain, am I going to be using the microscope often, or children, where you do not want to spend too much money, like several $100s or euros, like on the larger one over here, well, then I would say start off with these, and if you start to outgrow it after a couple of months or years, well, you can always get yourself or your child another one. Okay, and another thing is that those microscopes I think are also suitable for certain homeschooling applications. Okay, they don't cost much, and if you provide the appropriate slides, then the children can look at the things under the microscope that they actually learn about in the curriculum. So easy, uncomplicated introduction into microscopy without needing to spend a lot of money, with certain limitations. But again, these are not toy microscopes, and I use them to, when I go traveling and want to take something along, a microscope, I take it along. I do microscopy there, take a picture using my mobile phone, and that's it. Nice and portable, also suitable as a field microscope. So I would like to also spend a few minutes to talk about so-called toy microscopes. There is a little bit of a saying in the microscopy community: the more colorful the box in which the microscope is packaged, the more toy-like it is. To a certain extent, there is a little bit of truth behind that, because this microscope here came in a very, very boring box. Okay, just want to show it to you. That's the box that it came in. No colors, no branding even on here. Many toy microscopes essentially they come in very colorful boxes with a lot of accessories, and those accessories I think are really, in I would say most cases, not necessary. Many toy microscopes are also sold with unrealistically high magnifications. When you really go up to that magnification, 1,200 times, for example, yeah, they're not lying about that. It does magnify 1,200 times, but the problem is you're still not going to see anything because it's too dark and it's too blurry. Yeah. So what's the point? As a matter of fact, I think it's much better to invest a little bit more money in one of those introductory microscopes, because these are actually microscopes that really connect you already to, how shall I put this? If you use those microscopes and take pictures with those microscopes, you are able to publish them online even, and you're able to be part of a community. The quality is good enough to do that. Not with toy microscopes, okay? It's very fuzzy. Sometimes there are plastic lenses there. And I found some of the toy microscopes that I tested to be quite difficult to use. Very difficult to turn. The tolerances were too large. You could not focus precisely. So generally, there is the recommendation. No, don't buy toy microscopes. It's not necessary anymore either, because those introductory microscopes these days, do not cost so much more, but you get significantly more value because there are no additional accessories. Okay, no little, I don't know, laboratory, plastic laboratory test tubes or so, not necessary. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. I already mentioned this, that some microscopes are advertised with their magnification, and the point here is the following, that magnification is something that you should probably completely ignore. I need to tell you why. The magnification, the theoretical maximum magnification that you're able to get with a microscope is 1,000 times. A 10 times eyepiece and a 100 times objective gives you a 1,000 times magnification. Anything more than that will, of course, make the image appear larger, but also more blurry and darker. So if I were to exchange those eyepieces with 25 times eyepieces, 25 times 100 is 2,500 times magnification. It's going to be blurry. Those introductory microscopes, they have a maximum magnification of 40 times. 10 is 400 times. Now, because they also come with a 25 times eyepiece, it would be a total magnification of 1,000 times. Yeah, basically, yeah, the same as the other one here. But the image quality is going to also be quite blurry. So I would say the maximum useful magnification of those introductory microscopes is around 400 times. This is way more than enough for observing nature. Yeah, so you can see all of the things that you want to see. I think something that cannot be seen well with those introductory microscopes are bacteria. Bacteria are generally difficult to observe. You need to have a microscope with a decent condenser to increase the contrast, and the depth of field has to be very narrow, and so on. So even with those microscopes here, seeing unstained live bacteria can be quite a challenge anyway. And honestly, I think I mentioned this, bacteria are not really useful anyway. So when would you then buy a slightly better device, which also costs more? Those microscopes that you have over here cost around 300 euros or dollars upwards. And depending also if you want to connect a camera here, and depending also on the optical quality. But generally all of those microscopes that of around the 300 to 400 euro or dollar range, are made just like those over here, are made in China, and have the disadvantage that they are very difficult, if not, very difficult to maintain. In the sense, if something breaks, you're going to have problems getting spare parts. They're not designed at this price category. They're not designed to be maintained. And if you actually find some specialist who is willing to fix your microscope, it's probably going to cost you as much as buying a new one. On the other hand, if you take care of those microscopes well, there is no reason why they should actually break. They can I don't know, last a long time, a very long time. But of course, if you do something that should not be done, like, I don't know, damage some of the objectives, it might be more difficult to get replacement parts. So generally, those microscopes over here can already be used, depending on the features and the quality, can already be used already in routine laboratory work. And this basically means that this is indeed a serious possibility to get serious about microscopy if the interest is already there, and if it basically warrants to spend around 300 to 400 and upwards. This particular model was 600, and there are no limits to the top. Okay, so the transition from basic amateur microscopes and educational microscopes all the way to the more professional laboratory and doctor's microscopes is kind of fluent, and it goes up all the way to, I don't know, infinity. So microscopes can be really expensive as well, not necessary to, of course, spend so much money. So generally, with those microscopes, what is the difference between the different models? Not so much image quality, because in many cases, the optics are quite similar or even the same. But the differences are, of course, manufacturing tolerances and so on. Just want to give you an example here. This one is a good example. It rotates very smoothly, tolerance-free. Cheaper models that I've had is also rotates, but it's a little bit wobbly. Yeah, and you have to tighten the screw again, and then it's tight. So there are small issues which really do not impact so much on the quality of the image, but it's rather some kind of the overall handling of slightly more expensive microscopes is better. It's a question of whether it's worth the additional money. That's a question of taste as well. So which brand of microscope should you now buy? Also a very common question. I have to tell you that many microscopes in the mid-range, 300, 400, 500 euros, below 1,000 euros, let's say, are manufactured in China, and then rebranded. They're exported to Europe, to the United States, around the world, and then the importing company slaps the brand on it and then basically sells it. And this basically means that many microscopes indeed are quite similar in appearance and even use the same optics. Because they're indeed from maybe even the same factory where it was made. They're simply rebranded. And for this reason, it does not make always a lot of sense to compare the microscopes, which brand is better, because it depends more on the individual microscope than on the actual brand. Because it could be that one brand has microscopes ranging from very basic introductory ones all the way to, I would say, laboratory usable microscopes. So the range is very wide, and it's not a question of brand, it's a question of which, what are the quality standards and the features of the individual microscope. However, there are a couple of companies out there, very traditional companies, that have been making microscopes now for a very long time. And those companies do not sell their microscopes over Amazon, for example. And they also do not outsource the making of the microscopes, but rather they manufacture them themselves. And there are always four names that kind of keep on reappearing over and over again. No specific order here. Olympus, Nikon, Leica, and Zeiss. These are the four big name, the big four, I used to call them, companies. And these companies, they manufacture microscopes with a target group specifically for research and medical use. Also educational use at universities, because they're providing sometimes complete servicing packages. Those microscopes are sometimes significantly more expensive, but they're also maintainable, better maintainable. So if you have an issue with a microscope, you're able to obtain spare parts. Sometimes in some countries, you can even send your microscope in. They will service it, they will clean it, and they will repair it for you if something goes wrong. So you have essentially, I would say, a microscope for life, because you can keep on fixing it and upgrading it and maintaining it. So the philosophy is quite different. And should you buy one of those? Well, it depends how much money you're willing to pay. I'm not saying that you're able to see much more with those microscopes than compared to one of those more economical models. Just because a microscope costs 5 times as much does not mean that you're able to see 5 times more. As a matter of fact, it's going to be probably more expensive with less features even. But the overall quality of the microscope can be significantly higher, and also the resale value. So it is a philosophical question of whether it's really worth worth spending significantly more money on a device where you cannot do much more. But I've had parents also talk to me, and they said, please recommend me a microscope. And I recommended one of those, and says, for your child this is going to be good enough. Yeah, and if the child is busy and interested with this microscope, then after some time you can upgrade. And they said, no, we want to have a really good one. And what do you mean, what really good? How much are you willing to spend? And says, yeah, well, they named the sum, and I said, well, okay, in this kind of price category, if you're really willing to spend that much for a present, then well, contact directly one of the big 4 companies. Now, in recent years, there have also been other companies have started to appear more and more and become more and more popular, which offer also quality microscopes for laboratory use, doctors use, medical use, research use, which are also cheaper than, for example, the big 4. Just for example, this one over here that I have. So for example, this one over here is an older model, is a Euromax microscope. Okay, so the company Euromax is a Dutch company, if I'm correct, and they also manufacture to significantly lower prices very decent microscopes. And as a matter of fact, in our school where I teach, we've got microscopes from that company because they're good and significantly cheaper than the others. So what are some of the things that one could be aware of or should be aware of? Well, one of the things is that microscopes need parental support, especially the younger that the children are. I already mentioned this before, but there is indeed a danger that the kids will lose interest after a couple of days otherwise. When I start microscopy in my biology lessons, usually the first 1 or 2 lessons, I simply let them use the microscope and put under the microscope whatever they want to look at, simply to satisfy the initial excitement. And only after this initial excitement has kind of calmed down a little bit, then is the time when I can actually go on with the curriculum, and then I can actually ask them to put down under the microscope specific slides, and then we can have a discussion about the curriculum content that I want to teach. But this initial interest is of course very important, but it subsides also very quickly, because sooner or later the kids are going to realize, well, there is not a lot of interactivity here. I mean, you put a slide under the microscope, you see cells. In many cases, they don't know what you're looking at because it's all very abstract. This is how, I don't know, onion looks like, and you see those little regular cells, but they cannot make sense of it unless there is someone there that explains it to them. So it's almost like looking at, I don't know, static images sometimes. And if the children are now used to highly interactive and moving videos and so on, then it can be quite possible that after a short time, the pictures or the images that they see under the microscope kind of is not very exciting anymore. And for this reason, there is really necessary parental support. Where can we collect water samples to look at some of the water organisms? There's movement going on, and that's much more exciting, of course. So parental support is one important thing, and another important thing that one has to consider is that children sometimes don't have the theoretical or biological background knowledge to also prepare the specimens. This is also one of the reasons why I decided to make these YouTube channels here, so that people actually see how specimens are being prepared and to kind of motivate people to go out to observe nature. But if you don't know how to do that, how do you now actually take a leaf and put it under the microscope? And what do you actually see there when you put it under the microscope? And that's the reason why I also made YouTube videos that kind of show that, so that people children stay motivated. Now, sometimes people consider also buying used microscopes. So in other words, brand microscopes from, let's say, the big 4 microscope manufacturers. They have a higher resale value, and there is a pretty decent second-hand market also. Not always cheap, I have to tell you. But these are quality devices that have been in use for many years and will be in use for a lot of years to come as well. And should you buy yourself now a quality microscope, maybe not spend a significant amount of money, but kind of take the shortcut a little bit, you buy yourself a refurbished used microscope. Is this a way to go or not? Of course it is a possibility, but there are always risks attached to that, because you don't always know what you're buying. Sometimes the used microscopes have mechanical problems that you might not be aware of. The lubrication oil in the gears of the microscope may have started to solidify and turn hard. That's a normal thing that happens. Not a big problem under normal circumstances, because all you have to do is you have to send in the microscope to a company to get it cleaned. And here we are again. And this, of course, again costs money. And not all microscopes can be disassembled and reassembled again. So you see a little bit the question here. Is it worth the additional risk to actually buy a used microscope or not? And I would say that especially if you want to buy microscopes for children, possibly it's better to buy microscopes from online, new microscopes, and then if there's a problem with those or if you're not satisfied, you basically simply send them back if there's some technical issues, and then you get a refund. With used microscopes, that's of course not quite easily possible. So now let's talk a little bit about older children. Which microscopes should you buy for slightly older children, adolescents, maybe 13 years and older? And my general recommendation here is maybe get them involved in the whole process of buying a microscope. I know that it should be probably a present, it should be a surprise, but because the money spent is already a little bit higher, maybe it's worth actually getting them involved, because maybe some of them already have certain ideas. Now, I would not buy them a microscope if they absolutely show no interest in microscopy, because then you basically just end up spending a few $100 or euros, and then the microscope is not used. But if the children or adolescents indeed express a certain interest in the sciences, maybe you can have a conversation with them, and then if they show an interest in microscopy, then indeed it might be worth it. Otherwise the device is just going to stand around and not going to be used, and then what's the point? Now, another reason why I suggested you get them involved in the buying process is because maybe some of them already have an idea of the features that the microscope should have, because maybe they already know a little bit about microscopy from school. Many schools have microscopes, and maybe there are already certain expectations, and it could be that they actually know more about microscopy and the use of microscopes than their own parents or grandparents. So this is not something unusual. And for this reason, I think it's a good idea to get them involved, not that you end up buying a device that they're not happy with. So, but what are some of the features of the better, I wouldn't say better, but the slightly more expensive microscopes? And I've got an example over here. However, I have to say that there are also cheaper models available, but I just would like to simply summarize some of the features so that when you go shopping, that you are able to classify them a little bit better. First of all, this one over here has a so-called a trinocular head or a phototube, so you can connect a camera here. If the microscope does not have a phototube, then you can of course also connect the camera or mobile phone directly to the eyepieces, but this really adds a lot of convenience to the microscope. That's one thing. Most of them have are binocular, so that means you have two eyepieces to look through. So for longer viewing, this is much more convenient. It does not give you a stereoscopic view. It is not a stereo microscope, but it is significantly more convenient. The optics are better. No question about that. The contrast is better, the resolution is better, so you simply get a better impression. It looks nicer. And last but not least, important is the following. A little bit difficult to see here is there beneath the stage up. There is a little optical system here called the condenser, and this condenser is important for adjusting contrast and depth of field, so you can actually yet get a better image quality this way. And also in many cases, or pretty much in all cases, if there is a condenser, then there is also a filter holder. In many cases you can swing it out, and this filter holder allows you now to add so-called dark field filters or dark field patch stops, which again increase the contrast of some specimens, and the image or the specimen then appears bright on a dark background. So there are more things to play around with, if you want to say. Of course, the learning curve is also steeper, and I think that people who are generally interested in amateur microscopy over a longer time period probably are going to be very happy if the microscope has these features. And another thing important, a big advantage as well, this is called a mechanical stage. where you can precisely position the microscope slide, and this allows you to see the things also better, because it's not quite as jerky, the movement. So otherwise, if you try to move it around with your fingers, then it's very difficult to position it, and then it's the movement is very rapid at a high magnification. But this gives you a very precise way of controlling everything. There are two different possibilities. In this case, LEDs or halogen. More and more microscopes these days come with an LED light, but I would say that it's not a very important criterion. I would not say that halogen or LED, or that one is better than the other. But generally, halogen has this disadvantage that it generates quite a bit of heat, I would say that if you have the option with all things being equal, probably LEDs are these days the way to go. It gives you a much cooler light. However, it might not be always quite as bright as a halogen light bulb. I would say it's a little bit a question of taste, but these are simply the options that are available. Now, most microscopes have these features, okay? Most of the mid-range microscopes. And how are they now different from each other? And I would say that the difference is not so much in the optics. Yeah, there are differences, obviously. But I would say that in some cases you actually need a side-by-side comparison to be able to see a difference. I would say that a big difference would be the general manufacturing quality. It goes apart a little bit there. Or the quality checks that the companies do, but I would say that generally pretty much all of these microscopes are quite useful. If you want to go really a little bit further higher up, then those microscopes that have infinity written on it, okay, those infinity microscopes are basically, I would say, probably because they are not they're sold also for research and routine laboratory use. I would say they're probably even yet a little bit higher also in general manufacturing quality, generally speaking. Yeah. So if it says something like infinity microscope, then you can expect to pay more, but then this is also a little bit higher in the quality. However, it might also be that you end up maybe paying more money than actually necessary. The image quality is not so much different. Okay, I just wanted to clarify this here. Plan objectives are also available. This again pushes up the price a little bit further. Plan objectives are pretty good for photography because they give you a very sharp image all the way to the edge of the field of view. How much do you have to pay for these? I would say that they basically come at around $300 or euros and upwards, and all the way up to $600-700 dollars or euros, and then everything which is above that, 700 and higher up, generally is then more and more used also in a routine laboratory and at university and so on. If you have really a lot of money to spare, and if you say, okay, money is not an issue and I really want to get a very, very high quality, good device, one that you have, for the next generation and one that can also be maintained much better, then you have to, directly contact one of the big 4 microscope manufacturers, which I already mentioned, and get a quote from them. These microscopes are also then very much more serviceable. Service is available, which of course also costs money, but of course they also have a higher resale value. But those microscopes, if you take care of them, they're gonna last, I don't know, unlimited almost. And if there are some maintenance things that you have to do, then you simply have to fix it yourself. But otherwise, if you take care of a microscope, there is no reason why they should wear out. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. This was quite a bit of information right now. I know that I was not able to answer probably all of the questions that you have. You can, of course, please post comments below. I will try to answer them. But I also have to say that at the very end, the best microscope is the microscope that you end up, or that your child will end up using the most often. And do not forget, this is only the hardware. Getting a microscope is the easiest thing of the hobby. The real challenge then, of course, is you got to find some microscopy projects that keep you and your child busy. And this is where there is lots to learn. Okay, and that's one of the nice things about microscopy. Actually never becomes boring, provided that you keep yourself actively learning new things. If you always keep on looking at the same slides over and over again, I guarantee you that, that after a very short time, you've seen everything already. Right? So there is no more motivation to continue to use the microscope. But if you keep on developing a little bit the methods that you use, looking for samples, doing a little bit of nature observation with a microscope, yeah, it's a lifelong hobby and can keep you interested for many, many, many hours. I wish you all the best now. Please do post comments below. Happy microbe hunting as always, and see you around next time. Bye-bye.